Hey folks, to this Guerrilla show. I'm James Green. I'm a partner and VP for content at Actual Tech Media. And we created this Guerrilla Guide Q&A show to basically take and jump straight in. A lot of the events we run, there's a while where we listen to a presentation first, which are some of my favorites, and then we do a couple minutes of Q&A at the end. And we thought, wouldn't it be fun if we could do where the whole thing is Q&A and we just ask questions the whole time. We have a guest who's an expert and we just pepper him or her in half an hour. So that's what we're going to do today, specifically about networking. And my expert guest for today happens to have spent some time, a fair bit of time, as I think he'll tell you, in the networking space, and is capable of fielding all of our questions to this chat. My guest today, David, I'm going to let introduce himself in a minute here, is head of product marketing at Alkira, and he'll tell you a little bit about Alkira as well. David, welcome to the show. Would you quickly introduce yourself and Alkira, please?
Sure. Thank you very much, James, for having me. Really excited to be with you guys here. It's a good opportunity to talk about what we do. So yes, David Klebanov. I've been in the networking industry for about 20 plus years. So I've done all kind of things. I've done corporate IT. I've done professional services. I've done vendors, Cisco, startups. We've been in a previous round. We've been with the startup called Viptela, which started this whole sort of a multi-billion-dollar SD-WAN market. Right, so now we are on to the next one, which is Alkira, right? And of course, we're going to talk more details throughout the next half an hour, right? But just as a highlight, right? So we are a networking company. We are operating within within the networking domain, right? And specifically, we address things that have to do with cloud networking, but not just in the cloud. I guess we'll touch on that too, but we do cloud, we do outside of the cloud, we do across the clouds, to the clouds, no clouds at all, just enterprise networking. So a lot of cool things, and we have a very interesting kind of approach to that. So yeah, happy to be here, James.
Very good. Okay. Well, I think the best way to start this conversation is just to talk about the way that cloud adoption has changed the way that we do networking. We used to have this sort of static center or headquarters or something where we did networking, and then in some cases some branch offices, but it was pretty finite. And as networking has changed with the cloud adoption and multi-cloud adoption, which makes it even more tricky, things look quite a bit different. Having had a front row seat to that, could you just kind of tell us a little bit about how has the way we connect sites and also users to sites changed as businesses adopt clouds, sometimes more than one?
Right. Yeah, so that's it's a good point. We're definitely seeing, if we kind of take a bit of a historic look, right, and we see where the networking industry has been relative to other IT disciplines, such as storage, compute, and if we look at what happened in those, we can kind of very cleanly track that they've moved from the early days of your application is deployed on a physical server. There is one application for one server, and these were kind of the early days of that. Then virtualization kicked in, and we said, well, there's a better way to utilize those resources, and why do we have to have one-to-one mapping? So let's take applications, let's put multiple applications, let's virtualize that into virtual machines, and let's put them on top of a common x86 infrastructure. And hence you have the virtualization era that kind of started, right? You have VMware of the world and KVM and Linux containers and all the good stuff. And then the cloud kicked in, right? AWS came to the scene, and everybody's like, oh my God, this is awesome. We're gonna just go to the cloud, and instead of just owning our own infrastructure and our own compute and storage, we're just going to rent it, right? We're going to go to cloud, and we're going to consume this as a service. And today, when you think about how applications and compute and storage are being deployed, it's a cloud first strategy. Everybody's like, yes, I got to go to the cloud. I actually have to explain why I'm not going to the cloud, because the clouds have matured so much. And AWS reInvent just happening right now, and we all observing the innovation that happens from there. So when you look at what happens in networking, you see that networking kind of been trying to match that up until the point there was this kind of a hardware-driven world of the 90s and the early 2000s, and then network virtualization kicked in with some acquisitions and some developments. You have the Ciscos of the world with ACI, VMware with then NSX. So virtualization kicked in, and that produced good results. But when you see, that's kind of when it stopped. As an applications and compute and storage moved into the cloud, applications really network really kind of didn't make that final step towards that evolution, right? And what we're really seeing is that is one of the fundamental things that customers that we're working with and just general enterprises are just lacking, is that sort of a cloud-like approach, the cloud-like thinking for networking that really kind of says, well, now my network can operate by the same principles that my cloud compute and cloud storage and cloud applications operate. Right? So really seeing that as kind of the next frontier for the networking. We call this a cloud era, and really kind of seeing how networking plays in that space.
So I had a chance to talk to somebody who's kind of speaking with a lot of customers and getting to gauge where they're at. What is your sense for where the majority of folks are at on the spectrum of, they've gotten all the way to the ideal that you're going to describe, the way Alkira does things, and at the other end of the spectrum is, 3 steps back where you were just describing the way things used to be. As you're out there talking to folks, where are most people on that spectrum?
Right. Good question. Right. So cloud networking, if we really kind of focus on cloud networking. So cloud networking is not new, right? People were doing networking in the cloud before, in the earlier days too. The question is that how do you achieve that? What is the level of expertise that you need? What is the level of investment that you need to put in there? Do I need to buy new hardware? Do I need to deploy new software in order to make it happen? So we can kind of see customers are being spread throughout this entire spectrum. Very, very sort of significant majority of the customers, if not all of the customers, are in some sort of a variant of a do-it-yourself approach. And there's multiple ways that you can do that, right? Some have gone through co-locations and established a footprint in those co-locations and procured the necessary gear and high-speed cross connects into the cloud and have made it work like that, and also put some network services like firewalls in those co-locations. Some have said, well, you know what, I'm going to build things inside the cloud. So they've gone and deployed software solutions within the cloud, software routers, software network services inside the cloud, and made it work like that. Some have leveraged SD-WAN technology as an on-ramp into that. So all of those are kind of variants of do-it-yourself approaches of people kind of making cloud accessible to them, right? So like I said, things have been happening for a while. It's just a matter of how complex it is, how expensive it is, how much time do you have to invest in this, and how much tolerance your organization has to allow you, sort of as a network engineer, to have that luxury of time and budget to go into it. And is there a better way of doing it?
So you mentioned networking needing to evolve and to become more cloudy. Compute did, storage did. The way I heard it was networking has been a little bit behind, and for a lot of companies, they need to get that one to a more cloudy approach. One of the questions I have for you about that is, in other types of cloud consumption, one of the biggest things that changed was the economics. What are your thoughts on how, as businesses adopt a cloudy way of doing networking, that will change the economics of networking?
You're absolutely right. Everybody has a dollar sign, on their forehead. No matter what you do for the organization, you gotta be cognizant of the fact that what you're doing is kind of, you ask money. Like businesses, IT is always has always been an expense for an organization. So the economics definitely changes, and the fact is that just like you said, the model with the compute storage applications that are moving to the cloud is a consumption-based model, which is, I deploy a virtual machine, I pay for it. I instantiate storage volume, I pay for it. I send so and so much traffic between my VMs, I pay for it. I send traffic into the cloud or out of the cloud, I pay for it. So it's really kind of a pay-per-use type of thing. And networking has kind of never followed that model. And networking was always pay up front. You got to build something, and you got to build something for the next 5 years. So, you got to pay for this now, and then it's going to last you for the next 3, 5, 7, whatever years. And that has been kind of the philosophy and the mindset of the network is doing that. So as as applications and storage and all the other things are moving to the cloud and enjoying this kind of a pay-per-use approach, networking is the next question. Is that, well, why can't we have networking do the same thing? Why can't I pay for what I consume? Why can't I just pay for what I deploy? And when I consume it, I pay for it. If I don't consume it, I don't pay for this anymore. I send a gig of traffic, I pay for it. I didn't send a gig of traffic, I don't pay for it. I deploy the site, I pay for this connector. I don't, I decommissioned this, I don't. Same thing for cloud. I deployed a cloud workload. I have connectivity to it. I have a certain bandwidth to it, certain capacity to it. I pay for it. I don't. I decommissioned it. I don't. So that kind of philosophy in the networking is something that was also missing.
So I'm going to ask a bit about actually building a more cloudy approach to networking, but I'm going to save that for a little bit later. The connectivity between clouds and sites, if we think of that as sort of the plumbing, once that's in place, enterprises do all kinds of things on top of that, another layer up, and we often call that network services. I'm talking about things like firewalling or WAN optimization. And as we change the architecture, how we need to approach network services changes too. One of the specific ways that comes to mind for me is a lot of that becomes more distributed. Used to be that you could put a big HA pair of firewalls at the network perimeter, and there you go. That approach doesn't really hold in the cloud era. What are your thoughts about how network services and our approach to delivering them needs to change as networking becomes more cloudy?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, James. It doesn't quite work for the cloud world from several angles, right? This big boxes, like big metal, right, that you deploy in your data center and funnel everything through it, doesn't quite work in a cloud world, right? In a cloud world, everything, like you say, everything is distributed, and the fact that applications are moving from the data centers into the cloud almost becomes a necessity for these network services that are servicing these applications. And this could be firewalls, load balancers, like you said, WAN optimization, DNS, DHCP, IP address management, load balance, whatnot, right? Kind of have to tag along for the journey, right? And the idea is that when your application move, they find a very kind of a nice home for them in the cloud, because these clouds were built around this concept of compute and storage. But when you think about the networking and network services, it's not such a cozy place to be for these entities, right? And if you just think about what it takes to deploy a firewall, and not just deploy the firewall, what it takes to route the traffic to the firewall, what it takes to make sure this traffic is symmetrically routed to the firewall. How do you make sure that firewall is scalable, and not just scalable statically, like I'm going to create 10 instances of firewall for my rainy day, but how do I create enough instances to accommodate my traffic flows? But then if my traffic flow grows, I'm going to spin up more of them and auto scale that. And if it subsides, I'm going to auto scale it down. So all of these elements, they are very, very challenging. They're very sort of for compute guys, they're very obvious because that kind of compute and storage have been operating like that for a decade and a half. But in many of these network deployments, it's very foreign to those network deployments, right? And really need kind of a smart way of doing that. Because the traditional way of just taking these appliances, virtualizing them, putting them in the cloud, and then using traditional networking mechanisms to steer traffic to them, it just creates a lot of complexity.
Yeah, so I was just about to ask about something that's kind of in that same train of thought. If you were to do that and just go deploy, an OVA of that network appliance at every site, there are some advantages that come with that level of distributedness, availability and stuff like that. But it's a management nightmare. I mean, trying to keep all those things, so what I'm looking for, like the same, keeping them all with the same configuration, or I should say the correct configuration, and managing performance and security and all this stuff becomes a total nightmare. How do cloud era networking services done the right way help with those sorts of things, with managing it and keeping it manageable?
Right. You're absolutely right, James. There's kind of two extremes, right? You have the everything in a data center, which has everybody kind of gotten into the point in the last 10 years or so that this is not a good model, right? Putting everything in your data center is not a good model because that you need to backhaul everything to the data center. It's easier to manage, right? I don't have as many of them, right? So my, let's say, firewalls, my security policy is really easy to manage because there's only a handful of them. But obviously, I need to make a pretty significant investment in there, and everything, I'm paying, a cost of sending the traffic there from latency standpoint and capacity in the data center. The other extreme is the branches. So, okay, let's just, distribute everything. Let's just distribute the heck out of it and put everything in the branches. But then, exactly like you say, it's an administrative nightmare, right? How do I make all of these policies consistent? How do I make sure that, because now I've gone from just a handful of touch points into tens, hundreds, maybe thousands of touch points. So that's a nightmare, right? So the kind of the mid-tier approach is what we're seeing. The most interesting, the most appealing is a concept of I'm going to put my services where it's not too far from the applications and users. So it's not quite in a data center, but not too close to them as to being in every single branch and just making sure they're just, sort of causing this explosion of an administrative points of control, right? So finding this sweet spot of where these network services live is really the challenge. And obviously, we have our take at Alkira, how we do that. We do that with what we call a cloud exchange points, which are distributed points of presence of an Alkira service, which is where your network and your network services converge on this cloud exchange point. That's when your sites connect. That's when your clouds connect. That's when your data centers connect, and co-locations and users. And that's also where things get serviced. That's where your firewalls live. That's where your load balancers would live. That's where your DNS, DHCP, and IP address management would live. So all of this. So it's a meeting point between your on-premise stuff, your cloud stuff, and your network services. And we feel that this is really a very optimal place to put it because it's right there, not too far, not too close, right? Just the right amount of it.
That makes a lot of sense. So while we're on the subject of lots of things to keep straight, there's definitely a security aspect of that as well. The more things there are to keep straight, the higher the potential attack surface, the more that you can error and leave something exposed. So I think network admins are up there on the list of folks who are, hesitant to give over control, right? Maybe only storage people beat them. Storage people are like, don't touch my storage. Network admins are up there too. And I think some of that is, they're concerned about performance and stuff like that, but a big part of it is security too, right? And so as we move into a cloudy approach to networking, what are your thoughts on security? And is that moving us as we move to a more cloudy approach to networking, would the default be to be more secure, or is it going to cause us to become less secure and have to compensate?
Yeah, it's a good point. I agree with what you said. Is that network engineers have not been historically folks who are like, I'm gonna relinquish control. It's like, no, it's like, it's my network. I took a pride in this network. I built this network. I got some certifications to prove that I'm capable of doing that. So that we certainly see that, right? And there's been trends in the industry for the last like 20 years where there's been things coming along. Like, I don't know, I remember the early days of like IP telephony, where the old PBX guys were like really afraid that this entire IP telephony is going to just eat their lunch, right? What ended up being is that they just converted their skills from punching things into just going into the web interfaces and just provisioning IP telephony this way. So everything is changing. The network is the IP telephony, the voice world has changed 20 years ago. The networking is changing, and security is also changing, right? We know that security folks, they also like to kind of take pride in what they do, and I've worked with a fair amount of security folks in my career. Their default answer is no. Kind of like the last rule in the firewall is that deny everything. So the first thing is that the first thing you come and say, can I do this? No. It's not secure. It's not protected. So when you move things into the cloud, it becomes exponentially worse because it's out of your control. When things were your data center and you had control, it was kind of a negotiation tactics. But when things move into the cloud, it's a whole different game because things are out of your control. So there's definitely a need to do some housekeeping with firewalling, and we talked about that. But it's more than that. It's how do you secure the traffic connectivity, right? How do you make sure that everything is encrypted? How do you make sure that everything is encrypted at scale? How do you make sure that you maintain sort of operational logging for things that are happening? So if somebody came and said, can you prove that we're troubleshooting, or we're trying to get to the root cause of a certain security incident, can you give us like what happened? Tell us what happens. What do you see? So there's a lot of that becomes a bit of a black hole when it moves to the cloud, because clouds are a service, right? And as a service, you don't get the full exposure of what happens in there. So things like I said, traffic encryption and logging, and being able to see what's happening, who is attacking whom, where the traffic hotspots are, things like that. These are very, very important things, and we feel that they were important before, and they are very important when things are moving to the cloud.
So all of those, they're the things that cause people to be resistant up control. It's that when it's my network that I built and that runs on-prem, I can see the things, I can know where they're coming from, I can, one of the challenges with cloud is this notion of visibility. Can I see what I need to see to make the decision I need to make the, fixes I need to fix? And so what are your thoughts on, specifically towards networking, how to make sure that as we adopt a cloudy approach to networking, we maintain visibility?
Right. It's a very good point. This entire day two operations is a very critical point, because you can't really run your network when on fairy dust, right? Like you gotta have some concrete data to show how things are behaving, how things are performing, with everything is up and down, things like that, right? You would never be able to run a network or healthy network if you never had these things, right? And when things move into the cloud, again, I know we mentioned that a few times already, but when things move into the cloud, things change. And they changed because you do relinquish control of the infrastructure to the cloud. And how do you get the same level of visibility, the same level of troubleshooting, the same level of logging that you as a network engineer kind of had in your data center because you had the proper tool set for it. And now it moves into the cloud, and all of the tool set, well, I wouldn't say it becomes irrelevant, but becomes challenging because these tools were not built with cloud in mind. They're not cloud aware. They're not cloud native. They don't really understand the dynamics of the cloud itself and the cloud infrastructure, right? And worse than that, every cloud is different. So if you did manage to figure it out in AWS and your business takes you into Azure and you're now extending your network and security into Azure, guess what? Azure works in a different way than AWS. So that tool set that you've built may no longer be completely relevant to what you're doing in that other cloud. So this whole idea of the multi-cloud really challenges challenges organizations not only from networking and security standpoint, but also from this operational side. I have visibility. I may have built some tool set on AWS, and that works fairly well. But then I start adding, Microsoft Azure workloads, and all of a sudden it's like, I'm not quite sure what is the traffic that goes between AWS and Azure, and which of that goes to the firewall. So things of that nature are very, very challenging to the organizations. We see this all the time, and that's why we kind of took this approach of developing this uniform, ubiquitous platform that extends across all the clouds, and it takes care of all the networking and network connectivity and security needs, but also gives you this single pane of glass for all of the operational tasks that you need to do around visibility, troubleshooting, things like that.
So we're about out of time here at the top of the hour. I want to ask you about Alkira builds a platform to all the things that we've just talked about. But the reality for most organizations is when they adopt a platform like that to help them, in this case, do more cloudy networking, there's still a whole bunch of things that they have already bought, provisioned, and rely on that they're not just going to throw away. So my question for you is, how do people adopt something like the Alkira platform and tie that into the other things they're going to continue doing? And what is the kind of, the connectivity between the two look like? And that's both, I'm asking that both architecturally speaking, but also organizationally speaking, how legacy and their cloudy network at the same time, because really they'll probably coexist, right?
Right. Yeah. It's a good point. There is no greenfield, right? We are not that lucky, and network engineers are not that lucky to have the fortune of deploying greenfield environments, because obviously greenfield is easier. You don't have to carry over legacy. So how do you interoperate with your existing environments? That's something we're seeing every single day, every single customer that we encounter. So it really depends on where customers are in their journey. We know that customers have invested in all kind of connectivity needs prior to that. Some are on MPLS networks, some are on SD-WAN networks, and we know that internet is taking over a lot of the connectivity needs. We know that was the premise behind SD-WAN in the kind of the early 2010s. And going forward. So depending on how your sites, how your offices are connected into the network, connecting them into the Alkira platform, into those Alkira Cloud Exchange points. There's sort of several connectivity mechanisms that we support. You can do this through IPsec connection from remote locations. You can do regional handoffs from your MPLS network. You can do dedicated connectivity from your co-locations. So there's quite a few mechanisms of how you can onboard your on-premise environments into Alkira. On the cloud side, of course, we're completely cloud native, so we leverage all the underlying tool sets of the clouds, and we kind of connect your cloud workloads into those Alkira Cloud Exchange points. So, and then one last thing I want to touch on, as you said, organizationally, is that you're absolutely right. It's not just the technology is changing and the technology landscape is changing, but organizationally, running things sort of in a cloudy way and running things as a service, which is really kind of the punchline behind all of this, is that how do I turn my network not just be cloud-like, but be as a service consumed, right? Which really opens that level of agility that we talked about. And that really changes the organizational sort of approach to that, of who is responsible for who, the separation of duties, the budgets, where the budgets go into. So a lot of interesting conversations we're having with customers that are exploring this sort of a cloud-like networking approach and as a service philosophy and as a service approach to the networking.
Very good. Well, that takes us to the top of the hour. A fun chat, folks. If you're watching and you enjoyed this Gorilla Guide Q&A, there's lots more Gorilla Guide resources available to you for free at gorilla.guide. You can go there and download those. If you would like to attend more actual tech media events, some of them featuring Alkira, where you get to see and hear more about what they do, and likely a demo, I would imagine, you could come and see that there. You can view all of the upcoming events at events.actualtechmedia.com, and you can register there. Specifically, for more about Alkira, if you just want to go and dig in right now, you can head over to the Alkira website. That's alkira.com/demo if you want to get a little stick time and see what it's like. And of course, follow them on social channels. And finally, you can follow David directly. David's on Twitter at David Klebanov. And David, it's been awesome having you on the show. I had a great chat. I wish we had an hour instead of half an hour. Thanks for doing it with us.
Thank you so much, James, and it's been a pleasure.